context rather than national or global. So we at least the marine realm, in the marine assessments, we try to start with this regional approach, and we try to emphasize that conservation actions should really keep in mind the regional approach. And with marine assessments, you often find that extinctions occur locally, so range detractions and that sort of thing. So you know, we really do try to look at that, I think, very closely. Bruce?
With tunas from the Sustainable Seafood Foundation, there actually are by populations. And this is particularly important for tunas and for the sharks and birds that are bycatch, because it falls to the regional fishery management agencies to do something about these things. So the management of all the species associated with high seas fishery is by regions by definition. So the information is being used that way. And as I say, that affects sharks and birds because they're regional because of their bycatch from fishing.
Questions? Any more questions or discussion?
Yes, some of the presentations contained a lot of information and not enough time to digest it. Will they be available online?
Yes.
Okay, that's great. And in the same direction, Bruce showed one of the slides where it seemed that none of the ketodontids are threatened, while a high percentage of the corals were threatened. Now, there are ketodontids that are colivorous, and we saw in our monitoring activities that in areas where the coral reef died off completely, certain species of ketodontids disappeared. So how comes, how could you explain this discrepancy?
This is an excellent question, and we really struggled with that too. So first off, with the coral assessments that were really the first major group that was done after the groupers, we did all of the corals of the world, and that those assessments followed very much the Wilkinson numbers. So we used the actual percentages of coral reefs that had been destroyed, and totally destroyed. And that was a very conservative estimate of the amount of the populations of corals that had also gone down. So we used very much population numbers for corals, and we were able to do that using the proxy of coral reef area lost. Now the coral reef area lost is by region. So a lot more coral were lost, for example, in the Indian Ocean, and relatively small numbers of coral reefs were lost in Oceania. So one of the things that Helen showed was that the level of threat in Oceania actually seems to be a bit smaller than the average. And the reason for that is that a lot of these numbers right now are being driven by the coral species. And in Oceania, they have the least sort of extent of coral reef actual area lost. Okay, so with butterfly fishes, even though such things as Chaetodon trifascialis is a obligate corallivore, its distribution overlapped with enough of the area that wasn't lost that it ended up globally as being least concerned. Again, in certain areas, that species definitely has undergone some local extinctions because of the loss of coral. Okay, so in areas of the Indian Ocean, Chaetodon trifascialis is gone because the acropora is gone. Okay, but on a global basis, it was still least concern. So we really need to make sure that the red list assessment process is very rigorous. We cannot, we have to do it at a global basis, but it should be also clear from our rationale and the information that's in the red list that we were really concerned about the obligate corallivores in certain areas. So it's You know, it's something that sounds counterintuitive, but when you really do a rigorous analysis, that was our conclusion, and it escaped.
Just a point of information before I forget. In Hong Kong, they used to take prisoners in the estuaries, and the saw would end up in some of the temples. There's accounts of that as well. So that's southern China estuary. So at least in southern China, there is information that they used to be present at least.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, Ken, we arrived late. Just wondering if you guys touched on mercury in tuna, that is already above the level safe for man.
Yeah, certainly that's a health problem for man. But in terms of a level of threat for tunas, what would you say, Bruce?
That may be a threat to people, but it's not a threat to the tuna.
Well, it's,
and we have analyzed some 100-year-old tunas.
I'm not yet done.
We've analyzed some 100-year-old tunas, and they have approximately the same level of mercury as they have now, because there's a constant natural release of mercury.
I appreciate that. You don't even know what my question is.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Talk, like when you take scallops and the bycatch for dredging and trawling, that's being done by the fishing industry, which we can't stop globally. The gyres in the Pacific and in the Atlantic are just getting more polluted with plastic, and dead zones have increased, and marine protected areas are just 1.6%. I'm just wondering if all this has been touched.
Well, certainly that.
I mean, I'm not arguing with, sure we can eat tuna, but when you take a scallop and eat it, the bycatch of eating a scallop, all that is destroyed.
Yeah. I understand what you're saying. It's the lack of marine protected areas certainly is raises the threat for many marine species. Pollution and plastics in the ocean, particularly for birds. Stu, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a huge number of birds every year that are lost because of the predominance of plastics in the open ocean. Some phenomenal numbers.
It's a particular problem for some species, yeah.
Yeah. So those are big problems, and hopefully our red list assessments will highlight some of those problems and bring that to the forefront. Yvonne.
One of the things that I maybe didn't highlight strongly enough, but with the conversation and some of the other examples, I'd like to highlight a little bit more, is the real need in the red list assessments and within your own countries for some of these species is to collect the trade data. So many of these animals now are in international trade. Very, very important for many of the sharks and rays to have that data. And in the case of Hong Kong, identifying Hong Kong as a major center means you can focus activity and action in major trade centers to try to bring about more sustainable trade and better enforcement in those centers. So while it's a real temptation to obviously focus on the animals and the habitats, also focusing on the trade centers I think is very important. So having trade data is very
on the trade issue, our coral reefs then were just being exported to the United States. So what we did, using the presidential decree, we went with Tom Garrett of the Animal Welfare Institute and with Senator Warren Magnuson. It was amended into the Black Bass and Lacey Acts banning Philippine coral for entry to the U.S. It's worked well on our behalf. Maybe it's just information for others here who feel that their coral reefs are being exported all over the world. They can follow our example. It worked. We have increased our protected areas, as you know, Ken, and it has worked. Our fish population has increased. Our coral is practically one of the richest in the Coral Triangle. I'm just sharing this, and And if you touched on the effects of ocean acidification, because ballast water and stuff, which is just killing everything in the ocean.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I often recall going to curio shops in the eastern part of the United States where, corals and shells and things are sold as, curios.
Some sawfish bills.
Yeah, exactly. And many of these are coming from the Philippines, or not sawfish bills, but, yeah, I agree. The trade information is very, very important, and also enforcement of the trade restrictions, for example, is what they're going. What they have enacted in the Philippines is also very important as well. And as you know, they're still intercepting whole shipments of corals and things that are going out of the Philippines. But at least the legislation for that is in place.
Yeah, how do you have a method to quantify the trade data, which I find sometimes extremely difficult? We did surveys along the coast of Somalia on shark fin fishing, well, on shark fisheries and shark fins. Then it was Yemeni boats in front of the coast of Somalia that bought the fins and brought them to Yemen. From Yemen they go to Dubai, from Dubai they go to Hong Kong. But
Yeah.
we were unable to quantify, even get an idea about the quantities. It seemed to be enormous. So how do you approach this?
Well, in the IUCN Red List, we have a very crude way of capturing trade data. And it's meant to be primarily whether or not trade is a red flag or not for that particular species. So there's groups within the IUCN that do try to keep track of some commercial species in terms of detailed trade information, but in the IUCN Red List, it's relative.
There's traffic.
Traffic, exactly. Sorry, I was trying to think of the name there. Traffic. Thank you. Traffic is the.
Yeah, I'm going with that.
I can add to that too. So, for example, Hong Kong's a big entrepot for trade, and I think it's maybe 10 years ago, they have a harmonized code system which is used across the globe to a greater or lesser degree of detail. But when seahorse trade became an issue, the government was approached to add the detail of seahorses in trade into Hong Kong, and that was added to the system. So keeping an eye on this, and maybe if there are key needs for trade information, at least international trade, there may be a possibility through the government to get more information, a greater resolution in the trade information. So we've had that experience on a number of occasions in Hong Kong, and it really helps to understand what's happening with the movements of things. So it is a possibility. Not all governments would seek for change, but some do.
Nick.
Yeah, I really like, clearly one of the things I think about the CITES is mortality of manta rays and mobula rays, mainly from trade and gill rakers. And I think the big problem with generating a CITES proposal is going to be getting trade data to show that trade is the driving process. And if there's any way we can get more data on trade and gill rakers, that would really, really help. Can I make a second point? I think the point made here earlier about emerging threatening processes like dead zones and so on is something that we don't capture, but we have captured it in the past. Because there's a group of you might be involved in this, Ken, we've dealt with trying to understand the extinctions posed by the deep horizon oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. So IUCN, both terrestrial and marine, have been responsive to emerging issues in ways like this in the past. Also, they're very concerned about the loss of Asian by the wetlands, so they just produced this situation report on that. So I don't think we, as a global marine species assessment group, have done that systematically, but maybe it's something we can do.
That's an excellent point, and this is something that we're actually starting as a pilot project right now in the Gulf of Mexico. Thanks to, I hate to say, thanks to the oil spill, the recent deep horizon oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, there's been a lot of interest in trying to be prepared for the next oil spill. So one of the projects that we have going right now, which is a direct offshoot of the Global Marine Species Assessment, is to use our GIS database of these species and the threats, so that we are going to do, and we're also going to do regional assessments of all of the species in the Gulf of Mexico, so that the next time that there's an oil spill, once you know where the oil spill is going or where it is, then we will have an immediate overlay of what threatened species are in the path of that particular oil spill. And that, in particular, will help us to be prepared for disasters and also for all other things such as dead zones. And we would like to use this as a means of recommending that this sort of preparedness be done on a global basis using the GMSA data. So that's actually a very good point for one of the ways that we can use the GMSA data.
Ken, just to add about the Gulf, the states that surround the Gulf, Louisiana, Florida, well, the